about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Will Valverde. I'm a senior creative director at M&R, as it says on your screen. I have been the lead writer of Benchmarks. This is my 13th one, as Philip noted. And my background is primarily in email strategy and creative. That's what I really love and enjoy. I've been doing that for closer to 20 years. And that is where I kind of start a lot of times when I'm thinking about sort of what's going on. It is a more mature part of a lot of programs for a lot of organizations. And so that's what I'd like to talk about. We're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. We're going to talk about ads and social media, maybe some mobile, all over the place. But that's really, I think, my first love when it comes to direct response.
Is email and creative.
Is email. I love email and creative. It's
Hey,
some fun.
listen, we can talk about email the
You get
whole
to do
time.
the messaging. You get to talk about what you really care about. You get to get
Yeah.
into some detail that you can't. It's really hard to do in SMS and some other channels. But you don't have to go on for 4 or 5 pages like you have to in direct mail. So it is that sweet spot where you get to like say what you really believe, really say something that is meaningful, and then get out of there quickly.
All right, so we will allot extra time to email based on your preferences, because I
Love
do
it.
find email is one of those things where I can kind of gloss over it quickly and say email, but we are finding. Oh, I was just looking at a client this morning with their Google Analytics, and they've got this new attribution report of lifetime value. Email visitors were the highest lifetime value of all of their online visitors. So we'll get to that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm kind of assuming most of you know me because you got this link to the webinar. My name is Philip King. I'm the managing director of Stella, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Stella in a second. I've been doing this almost as long as Will. My first online fundraising job was 1999 for United Way of Greater Toronto. So it's always been a passion of mine to look at what is going on online for these nonprofit organizations and how do we use the technologies to raise more money. So I'm very happy to have Will be my special guest today. I wanted Will to just talk a little bit about M&R because some of you on the webinar may not know M&R. So Will, could you just tell us a little bit about the agency?
Sure, yeah. So we're a US-based agency with offices all around, although who lives in offices anymore? And we work with nonprofits of all sizes and issue areas to advance our causes. We focus on many of the digital channels, so we do advertising, social media, email, web stuff, mobile, all of those things, as well as some media relations and earned media, that sort of thing. We are about 150 people all over the country, and one of the things we really love to do every year is our annual benchmark study. So this year's study had about 250 participants. If you are one of them, or the organization is one of them, thank you very much. We try to gather data from as many nonprofits as we can and a wide range of experiences, so we can really give a baseline, something that we use on a day-to-day basis to really guide our own strategic thinking. It's something that's really grown over the years, and I'm super excited to get to talk more about it. It's my baby. Also, my
Yeah.
human children are also my babies, but this is
Yeah.
my other one.
Part of what we do with our clients, and I'll tell you about Stella here in just a second. I'm actually next will be Stella. For those of you who don't know, Stella is a new division of ST, which is an agency that's been around in Canada for over 40 years. And what I'm doing with Stella is we're doing a digital first part of the organization just to focus on accelerating digital revenue. Part of what we do with our clients is we get all of them to submit their data to the M&R benchmarking report, because that gives us a point in time annual snapshot of how we're doing compared to largely an American data set, but increasingly Canadian data set. Our view of the world is kind of a funnel view. I mean, I always joke about this, that I see your website and your digital presence as a big funnel. We're trying to drive tons of traffic in the top and have them come out as monthly donors. They don't all do this, of course, but over time, what we're doing is we're using Google Analytics data. And if we have time, we'll get into a little bit of this. But again, my goal is to have Will really talk mainly through this webinar about benchmarks data, but I'm trying to link back to how are we going to take Will's benchmark data and apply it to our life between now and December 31st. This is a view from Google Analytics data. What I'm looking for are kind of default channel groups. You can see organic search, email, direct. What I find is with all of our clients, whether they're small, medium, or large, we've all got about the same 8 or 10 tools to use. It's not like we're going to come up with a new tool. So we've got, here's a client that raises between 750 and $1 million online. Organic search is their main moneymaker. Email is number 2, to Will's point. Direct traffic, which means Google thinks they just landed on your homepage and made a donation. Cross network, we'll talk more a little bit about digital advertising. This is a new type called Performance Max. Here's referral, way down low, organic social paid search on a site. Okay, so that's a smaller, medium size, 1.5 to 2 million. Same tools, but slightly different order, slightly different size. Paid search, it's the sweetest kind of paid ads because they're already searching for something related to your brand. Organic search, direct traffic, email, unassigned, meaning we can't quite tell where it came from, referral, organic, social network. So my point is here, we're going to go through the benchmark report, kind of looking at these buckets. Here's a larger client in 10 to 15 million online. Organic search is the moneymaker in this case. Direct, email's number third still, paid search, cross-network, on down we go. So I just wanted to create a little bit of context for the conversation we're about to have about the benchmarks report. Our belief at Stella is that we work with our clients, we make small steps every week. You know, this is kind of our methodology is let's make small improvements every single week. And over time, it adds up to changes in the online revenue. So without further ado, let's just dive into the data. The 2024 benchmark report came out, Will, a couple of months ago. I think, you know, it's relatively new.
Yep, in April.
In April. And part of why I put Will's wisdom, because you've been doing this for 13 years. So you can provide a little bit of additional commentary on top of what we saw, what we read in the benchmarks report. So let me just turn it over to you. This was the key findings scorecard, and you can go wherever you want.
Sure. I want to also be very clear. I did not come up with Will's wisdom. I appreciate the alliteration, but I am
I
not
said
that immodest.
that was mine. I'll take that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what you consider to be the key findings are really going to depend on sort of your role within the organization and sort of where your focus is. But I think, you know, the big headline news that we typically report out first, the first question most folks ask is what is happening with overall revenue? Is revenue up or down? That's the simplest sort of barometer of success here. And so overall, the average online revenue declined by 1% for participants in our study last year. So 2023 fundraising online over across all channels, 1% lower than the year before. I will say, when we talk about averages and benchmarks, we mean the median figure. So half of the groups fell below that and half fell above that metric. We do that so we don't have like a couple of outliers really swaying the whole thing. So that's like a normal experience. And it's not very exciting. You know, a 1% decline, we'd rather report on growth and we'd rather report big, exciting numbers and sort of like not a whole lot of change. We do try to report actually numbers as they are instead of how we like them. So this is what we have. And I think it doesn't tell us that much, honestly. I think if you're an organization and you're sort of struggling just to sort of keep pace with where you've been over the last couple of years, that's super normal. You are not alone in that experience. That is happening a lot of places. But that top line number, I think, it barely scratches the surface of sort of what's going on. I think as we look a little bit deeper, we saw some really big differences in different sectors. So we break out our metrics across different sectors. We saw that organizations in the disaster international aid space really struggled. So had the biggest decline in revenue from the previous year. And anytime we see an outlier like that, so, you know, something behaving differently, we start looking at why. And so what we saw was for those groups in that space, a lot of difficulty keeping up with 2022 fundraising. And it's not because they forgot how to do fundraising in 2023. What really happened was there was a big spike in giving in 2022 as the conflict in Ukraine began. So that happened February of 2022 is where we really saw that escalation and this big outpouring of support. So 2022 was actually a particularly strong year for groups in that space. And so what we saw in 2023 was just the sort of what often happens, which is the urgent, immediate thing that is grabbing headlines recedes a little bit, and it becomes a retention problem rather than an acquisition problem. And that story is what we're also seeing sort of writ large. So that same idea of it's not so much of what's happened, that something changed in the last year, it's that we're reacting to a baseline that is different, is what we are seeing across the board. So what we've seen over the last 2, 3, 4 years, 3 years, is these sort of small changes, you know, 2% growth over there, 1% decline over there, roughly flat, and not these big numbers. And then when we look at the 2020 numbers, so the first year of the COVID pandemic, we saw a big spike in giving. So all of the stuff we're talking about right now, we're really fiddling around the margins of this baseline that was established in 2020 when we saw this really big spike in giving. And since then, kind of no matter who you are, it's been trying to retain those donors, trying to find ways to stay relevant as that sort of outpouring of support really fades.
Well, can I comment that it sounds like you're saying the environment is really dictating these numbers. We're little boats floating on the ocean and it goes up and down. Is that kind of the picture you've got?
It is very insulting, I think, as a strategist to know how true that is.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Exactly.
Because we have limited. So yes, there is an overall environment, and that environment is forged by a lot of things. So part of that environment is what's happening in the world. That could be a war, that could be conflict, that could be natural disaster, that can be a pandemic. All of these things that are obviously right outside our control. Things like an election, both the lead up to an election, sort of the election season, which we're having a lot of fun with right now in the US, and as well as the aftermath. So very often what we see is if your side gets trounced in the election, you see an increase in support after that. That's sort of like really common. And that environment is part of what we're talking about. There's also the sort of technical environment that we're operating in. So like, what is Google doing and what is Meta doing to our ability to access supporters and to communicate with them? And a lot of what we're seeing right now with the transition from Universal Analytics to GA4, from what we're seeing in terms of the privacy protections, what the changes that iOS made. Apple decides that they want to enhance privacy for their users. They changed the way that images are downloaded in email, and now we can't use open rates anymore. Like they've become completely meaningless. We've stopped tracking it in benchmarks altogether because we can't get reliable numbers, and that's because Apple made a decision that was out of our hands. So when we talk, like, so much of what is going on is that environment, and our job is to understand what's going on there, to sort of see those trends, and then to find where the opportunities are emerging that will allow us to continue to sort of grow and reach supporters.
When I said Will's wisdom, it's because you were able to say things with such confidence about the open rates being completely irrelevant. I love to hear something like that, because a lot of clients are, should we, here's click-through rate, but there's still this open rate being reported in my email platform. But I like the how definitive you are about this.
Oh, now I'm going to add nuances and caveats because that's also part of it as well. I would say open rates may be useful to you if you are tracking them consistently over time and you have a model that is going to be consistent over time. What is really has become impossible for us is to aggregate open rates across as the way we do in benchmarks. Because if we have 200 different organizations who are seeing slightly different things, some of them are tracking machine opens differently from human opens or whatever is available in their tool. It's a mess and they're not compatible. So we saw in the first year after the iOS changes, we saw open rates go from, we'd always looked at like in the teens, 13% was roughly the report. And all of a sudden the average open rate was like 39%. And we were like, well, that's not happening. And so we've taken it out of benchmarks, but that I wouldn't say that you in particular should not, any given organization shouldn't track, because it may be useful. But
Okay.
look, this is never the most important. Look at page completion for sure.
Let's just keep moving on. I mean, you kind of have told this story already, which is, listen, this is a story about the pandemic and about the war in Ukraine. In other words, like, that's what's happening in the data at this point at an overall perspective. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that again, this is the median figures is what we're looking at here. So the half of organizations saw a growth of 32% or more between 2019 and 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And the or more encompasses a really big range. So some of this is also really going to depend on your issue area. So groups like food banks that were sort of directly sort of frontline responders during the pandemic, were really serving their communities directly, saw a really extraordinary growth. And that is, it wouldn't fit on this chart. It would like break it and go off to the right side. If you have to get another monitor to like be able to see what was going on with that chart.
Mm-hmm.
And for those groups, the last couple of years have been in some ways really stressful, because you want to continue to grow. And the need hasn't necessarily receded to where it was before, but the giving in many cases is really hard to maintain. And so it also really, I think, changes the priorities that we have and the opportunities we have. So if you're a group that saw really great growth, you may decide that you want to invest in paid advertising to continue to get that lead acquisition, to continue to build that funnel that you were talking about, Philip. And if you're a group that really did see that search and support, you may see, retention is the challenge right now. We want to really focus our attention on cultivation and engagement with existing supporters, because you have this big file now that you may not have had before.
Mm-hmm. And Caroline and Liz, are there any questions yet from the audience? And audience, I would encourage you to start sending in questions as we start wading through this data in a little more depth.
Philip,
question yet.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry. There's one that I see, which is, so, Will, you've talked a little bit about how the environment affects certain trends between different sectors. So I guess I'm wondering, just in terms of like, is there anything we can do to really help things like churn or email list growth size, for example, outside of the environment? Because I mean, we don't ask for a natural disaster, but sure, it helps our list grow. So do you have any kind of advice moving forward on how we can do that in spite of the environment?
Yeah, I mean, I would say what I tend to focus on is less reducing churn and more increasing acquisition. A big chunk of the churn that we see, roughly half of the churn that we report every year, is from hard bounces. So just email addresses that aren't used anymore. And nothing you can do. You have no impact on that. The other half tends to be unsubscribed. So that's the other way that people leave the list. It's basically evenly split between those two, roughly. You can affect unsubscribes. There are plenty of things that you can do in terms of the quality, the content, the way you are segmenting your list, that can help with that. But it's tough to really make a big impact. If you're seeing an unsubscribe rate of 8%, you're losing 8% of your list over the course of a year, which is pretty typical. You could work really hard and get that down to you lose 7% of your list over the course of a year instead of 8%. And like that's not nothing. That's a good audience. Those are people that stick around. There's a lot more you can do on the other side of the equation to really grow your list. And that includes what you're doing on your website to encourage people to sign up. It includes your advocacy efforts that you're putting out into the world. It includes your social media presence. It includes paid advertising for a lot of groups. That's a really big, important part. Where they are seeing new list signups is through that paid outreach that then feeds the funnel and allows you to have a bigger email list.
Can I add just a little bit, Will, to what you're saying in terms of focusing on the acquisition of email rather than reducing the churn? We're finding that in the last year, and I'm sure we'll get to this, Meta, Facebook became not good for creating donations as well as it was working a couple of years ago. So we redirected a lot of what I call our bottom of funnel spend to Google because it was converting well. And now we really are trying to use Meta to create harvesting email campaigns, advocacy campaigns, and it's working quite well for that. So just to kind of put a little bit of specificity to what you're saying, I think if we think creatively about how do we grow email, maybe using some of our other digital channels, we'll find methods to keep that universe expanding. Okay, let's move on. I loved this part of the benchmarks report, and I don't know if you want to talk to it, but you were looking at the online gift profiles by size and segment. So one was the last 3 years % of donors, and one was the last 3 years % of revenue. Could you comment a little bit on your perspective on this?
Yeah, as we were chatting about this conversation and sort of figuring out what we want to talk about, one of the questions Philip asked me was, what was the most surprising thing in benchmarks? And it's hard to, I've done it a bunch of times. Like I'm not surprised that response rates are. I'm in this work every day, so like most of the numbers are like, yeah, that about tracks my expectation. This was one where I asked our data team to take another look at it a couple of times. But I think it speaks to something fundamental that is happening that I think is super interesting. It did surprise me. So what we're looking at here is actually 3 years of data. This is the past 3 years. And as Phil said, on the left here, we're looking at the percentage of donors who are in each of these categories. So the orange bar at the top, that's 6%. That's donors who are given between $500 and $1,000. This is US dollars. We cut off donations there so we don't have sort of major mid-level programs swaying things. We saw that about 6% of donors last year gave over $500. And then the year before, we saw that about 6% of donors gave over $500. And then the year before that, we saw that about 6% of donors gave over $500, the exact same figures. And you can see those ratios are not changing. And then if you look at the percent of revenue, those 6% of donors accounted for 23% of revenue in each of those years. So that part's not a surprise. Donors who give a higher amount of money are worth more to your program. Like they are per donor are punching above their weight. But the stability of this, and think about everything that has changed over the last 3 years in every other part of our programs. When I talk about the environment, the conflict in Ukraine, the things that are happening in the world, the elections, the constant change, all the whatever Apple and Google and Meta are doing, all of that, the inflation changes, whatever is happening in the economy, none of it has changed this fundamental ratio between donors who are giving at different levels and the percentage of revenue that they are generating. And I'm like stymied by this. I don't know what to say. Like, it feels like we've discovered a natural law, and this is like, oh, that's gravity, 9.8 meters per second square. That's how fast gravity is. Like on Earth, that's what you're going to see the acceleration. It's like this like fact of nature that I am really curious about, and it's something that I definitely want to dig into more when we get benchmark data again next year to see if this holds up and to try to poke a little bit at sort of what's going on under the surface. Because I think if this is what you're seeing, it feels like it's hard to change this. And I think that whenever we see something that's hard to change, it's something that bears looking at.
I love it. And it reminds me of Pareto's principle too, which is the 80-20. I always used to feel that way when we were doing peer-to-peer fundraising, that 20% of the people would raise 80% of the money for the walk or the ride. So we really had to identify those 20% very quickly, very early, and treat them with love. I don't know exactly what to do with this data from a donations form perspective. My first thought is anything we can do to have AI try to push donors above that $100 level is interesting, because you see once they kind of cross that threshold, they're creating most of the value in the program. but I just love that you're looking at it from this perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think really the trying to adjust the trying to move people up the ladder, I think is the other thing that I would point out here. This is one-time gifts. And so
Yeah.
even as our programs tend to be shifting overall toward monthly giving, these numbers aren't changing. And so it also makes me want to wonder, it makes me want to look at where are which of these segments are we getting our monthly donors from? Who's moving out of this file and into the monthly donor file? Is it people at a certain level, or are we seeing a relatively even distribution there? We don't have those numbers yet, but I really want to see as our donor profile shifts from primarily one-time giving and is moving more and more toward primarily monthly giving, where are those monthly donors coming from? And is there lifetime value? Because we know that lifetime value for monthly donors tends to be higher. I'm not sure that I know at least if that's true in every one of these segments. If it is always going to be true, that moving people over is going to enhance.
That's very good. That's very nuanced. And we are going to get into monthly donor data in just a second. Questions from the group, questions from the audience at this point. Liz or Carolina, can you help channel if they have some? I'm going to keep moving along.
Yeah, nothing at the moment, Philip.
Let's talk for a second. For a group of people who are so focused on online, I thought it was great that this was the first time I saw it in the benchmarks report. Direct statistics.
This is the first time, yeah, we've reported on any direct mail findings. It's very limited. We got a couple of data points. Really, what we wanted to do was get a sense of scale. Because it's one of the things that every nonprofit has to decide is where are you going to put your staff, where are you going to put your resources, where are you going to invest your time and money into your programs. And one of the big divides is between direct mail and digital channels. So we wanted to just get sort of a sense of scale where we are. And what we saw was that for the average organization, digital channels raise a bit more than direct mail over the last year. So it was for every dollar raised online, 94 cents raised through direct mail, roughly the same, with a slight edge to the online channels. Not true across all segments and across all of our sectors. So we saw, for example, that cultural institutions, so things like museums, were raising more through direct mail than through online channels. Public media rights organizations were seeing a lot more value from their digital channels than from direct mail.
You know what I found fascinating about this view? This showed me the composition of the people who are doing the benchmarks report. They're very digital. From our perspective, most of our clients are raising much more money through direct mail than they are through digital. So it was great for me to see this view, which was, boy, these are super digital organizations that are participating in the benchmarks report. They're already past that 50% bench. More than half of all of the revenues are coming through digital, not through direct mail.
Yeah. And I think that by size is also a really important view here. So we also see really big differences. Small organizations saw a lot more of the revenue coming from direct mail and through digital channels. And as groups were a little bit, and by small for our study, these are groups that are raising $500,000 or less online in the course of a year. So that's how we're sort of defining that size. Medium is between 500K and 3 million in online revenue.
Yeah. Right. And then on the direct mail to digital, I mean, I don't know if you have much of perspective yet on this, but I get this question a lot based on the heritage of the agency that we're a division of. The question is, first of all, should we move direct mail to digital is one of the questions. If so, how? And then what will happen to the lifetime value of those donors over time? And I don't know if you have perspective on that yet or not, or if you're just starting to kind of dip your toe into the direct mail data.
I don't have a lot. I have opinions. I don't have data.
Okay, give me some opinions then. Let's go on the opinion sector.
I mean, I would say what I would think about is less, are we moving direct mail to digital? And it is more about who. Like, who are the people who we think that are going to be attracted to each of these channels? So you may have donors who are direct mail donors, and they always will be, and trying to force them somehow or encourage them or spend a lot of resources moving them online may not really be very effective for you. You may have donors out there who are digital only and no matter what you send them, it's going right into the recycling bin. And that's a challenge for everybody, and we're always trying to sort of figure out how to reduce those and match those up. The other thing is, there's obviously there's integration, and we're not going to invent the idea of multi-channel messaging right now. Like, that's already been out there in the world for a while, but it's still true, and it's true in different ways now. So we're seeing, we're not a direct mail firm, but putting a QR code on a reply device can help boost your revenue. And part of what you need to decide as an organization is sort of how you're going to do that attribution. Does that count as a direct mail donation? Does that count as digital? It's both. It's somebody going onto their phone and scanning the piece of mail that you sent to them and making a donation online, where do they fit at that point? And so I think trying to think about those individual experiences as much as we can, your audiences, is maybe a more sort of nuanced and sort of thoughtful way of approaching what's and to actually shift your numbers more so than like which is the channel that's correct, because it's going to be different for different people.
Mm-hmm. I would underline the idea of integration for sure from my perspective, and then ways to look not just for the way that mail can drive digital, but the way digital can drive mail is one of the things that we've been playing with, and email, digital ads, taking the direct mail audience, creating a custom audience in Meta, doing ads to that audience as they receive the mail. I think there are lots of nice overlaps between those two gigantic buckets of people, but you're right, it does come down to the segments. I think you're
And
right.
that's and lead acquisition is as well, using
Yeah.
online channels to get new contacts and then sending them mails is actually should be a core part of what folks are doing.
Part of what I like to do is I become donors and monthly donors to lots of different brands over time. And I'm always surprised because I'm doing this all online. And I'm always surprised when I get a nice thank you card in the mail from somebody, because it's not often. Usually I come into their channel, I'm digital, they send me email because I'm a digital person. But the occasional one will send me something in the mail, and it does impress me. Now I'm kind of inside of what they're doing, so I'm probably not the typical donor. Let's just take a deep breath and shift into monthly giving. You've already kind of set this up a little bit. The lifetime value of the monthly donor is much higher than the one-time donor. Let's see based on which segment they're coming from. If they would have given us a large one-time gift, how long will it take us to get that back in monthly? But is there anything you want to say before we dive into the monthly giving data about this?
There's two questions that I think Will alluded to this, but maybe we can just it says one nonprofit is in the market, both online and offline. Does that help lift overall results? I think you alluded a little bit to that. And also, did this benchmark exercise look at DM donors who responded online but were triggered by mail, which is what we were talking about?
So one of the complicated things about collecting benchmarks data from so many organizations is that attribution can differ from organization to organization. I believe, and I'm not on the data side, that we ask folks to use their normal attribution models, but the recommendation that we make is that it is about sort of where the gift is. If somebody mails a check, that's a direct mail gift. If somebody is on a web form, that is a digital gift, as a simplest sort of baseline. That's not like the correct way. There's not, I think, necessarily a specific right way, but I think that's pretty common and allows us to have some consistency in the numbers. And then to the other question of being in the market both online and offline, does that help lift overall? Yes, like that kind of synergy is absolutely effective. And it is, again, it's one of the things that makes attribution really tricky, is that if I send somebody an email and ask them to make a gift, I can track the clicks that come through that, and that's what we report in our email metrics. But we also know that if I send you an email, you're more likely to search for my organization in the next few days and make a donation that way. And where does that fit in? How are we calling that organic search? Are we calling that paid search if you click on a paid ad? Is that actually the email? So we do know that if you're sending a consistent, compelling message across more channels, whether that's online or offline, you're going to see better results, and you're going to be sort of more top of mind, more present for folks.
100% want to echo that. And then one thing we do for our clients, and I'm sure you all do too, is after the campaigns have completed, we'll go through and we'll analyze the list of online donors, and we'll match them back to the direct mail list to see if within a few weeks they made that online gift. Because in the GA4 data, it's a little bit of a mystery. Do you see what I'm saying? It's either a direct, it's an organic search, it's a paid search, it's coming in through one of those channels. But if we look at the actual name, oh, you know what? Philip made the gift online, but he happened to receive the piece of direct mail the week prior. We think there's a relationship there. The other little trick that we do is try to drive QR code or a vanity URL, some kind of / URL, because at least then we can capture that data in our online systems to say, listen, we didn't show that QR code to anyone except the direct mail audience. Those folks should be credited to the direct mail program.
Yeah. And I think that all great stuff to do. It's all much more effective when you have a larger list. It's harder to pull those things off with a smaller list and with a smaller resource. So like it's always about that balance as well of like, well, if we spent 100 staff hours trying to like sort out where these 15 donors came from, is that really worth our time? So I think there's that balancing act can be really tricky as well.
Let me say one more pro direct mail thing before we shift gears. I do believe with all the clients we've worked with, direct mail doesn't get enough credit for the growth of digital programs than it probably should. Okay, I'll say that as a blanket statement. If we take the time to really study bounces in traffic and bounces in donations, they are very closely correlated with direct mail drops. So I just want to say that out loud, because a lot of times the direct mail teams feel threatened by the digital team. And there's no reason to, as long as data is being shared. They should be kind of the same. They're on the same team. We want to get the gift from Philip, whether he gives online or through the QR code or through the mail. We don't care. That's his choice.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, the donor does not experience you as two different programs within an organization. They experience you as one organization, and that's what we want.
It's the fight over budgets. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, everybody wants to kind of claim the gift because then they get more budget or less budget. Okay, we will leave the direct mail digital debate for a later time. Monthly giving. Okay, so everybody wants more monthly donors. Let me say this, just going into this. The Americans call them sustainers, you know, the Brits call them regular givers. So everyone wants more of these folks. Is there anything you want to say before we start getting into the data about monthly giving?
I would say that's true. And then the flip side of that is that what we are seeing is that more people want to be these people. This is actually a more attractive offer for more donors than it has been in previous years. And this is a trend that we have been tracking year over year over year. This is not something that's happening right now. This is something that this is the road that we are on. And it's going to continue, I think, as far as any of us can tell.
I think that is a fantastic point. And sometimes when I think of it, I'll talk about the subscription economy. I mean, as a consumer, forget about my philanthropic life for a second. More and more, I'm paying for things annually, monthly, quarterly. And organizations are really trying to shift me from my monthly payments to quarterly payments or to annual payments because they've got big data telling them that my lifetime value will increase if I shift those frequencies. So I just want to kind of underscore your point, which is, it's not just that we want more of these, it's that the donor's purchasing behavior is changing.
Yeah,
I think that's great. So here's some data from the benchmark report. Do you want to speak to it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Just to pull out the top line numbers here. So what we're seeing on the left is monthly giving as a percentage of total online revenue went up from 27% to 31%. Now, that's and again, this is something each year we see sort of it's growing as a percentage of overall revenue. On the right side, I think this really also puts into the context. I mentioned at the very beginning, we saw a 1% decline in revenue on average. What that actually happened is that we saw a 5% decline in one-time giving and 6% increase in monthly giving. So it's not just that giving was down, one-time giving specifically declined, even as monthly giving continued to grow. So I think that divergence, again, is something that we continue to see. Even in really strong growth years, where we have seen an increase in both one-time giving and monthly giving, we are still seeing faster growth in monthly giving. That's been really consistent. And so I think one takeaway that is important there is I think some folks get the sense of like, oh, we're behind. Like we're not where we want to be with monthly giving. We always want to be setting goals and moving closer toward it. But if you're like, oh, we're not here yet, we're below this benchmarks, it's never too late. There's never a wrong time to start trying to move folks over and try to really emphasize that monthly giving process. Some of the ways that we're seeing the simplest things you can do is defaulting your main donation page to a monthly giving ask. And we're seeing a lot more of this. So that's a first step. And just doing that tends to have a really big impact. And really it is oftentimes what we are seeing is that it's at the donation, that landing page. That's where we're seeing our ability to really shift folks from one to make that decision. Sending an email that says, or putting up an ad that says, become a monthly donor is hard. Like that's actually a really hard ask for people to start thinking of themselves in that way before they've committed to giving. But once they've made that decision, yes, I want to support this organization, saying this is the most effective way for you to do that. And you do that through what you default to. You can do that through a little note that says, you know, this is the way that your giving can make the biggest difference. You can do it from a donor testimonial, all the different ways that we can communicate the idea that monthly regular giving matters and that it's a more effective way of supporting the cause. All of that at the donation page is really where I would want to focus attention there, rather than not trying to change how you're communicating in your actual direct response, you know, what you're putting out to the world.
I love it, Will. It's can I try to dispel a belief that I have heard? Maybe it's a Canadian belief, I'm not sure, but digital won't get us lots of new to file monthly donors. I mean, I do come across that belief in some of my conversations. I think your data and other organizations, particularly Americans that I've spoken to, would go completely against that, where I find that they are doubling down on their ability to go find totally new to file monthly donors purely from their digital program. Can you comment a little on your perspective?
Yeah, no, I mean that's a big part of what we do with clients all the time. And you know, I think a great expression of that is, you know, in doing acquisition through like paid advertising. So let's say on Facebook, you're going to put up some which is like less effective than it was a few years ago, but putting up an ad that says, click here to, you know, to save the whales. Like that's what we're trying to do here. You can put up an ad that says, become a monthly donor to protect whales month in and month out, and that may not perform all that well. you can put up an ad that says, click here if you really care about protecting these special animals. And then on the landing page, say the most effective way you can do that is becoming a monthly donor. Those people will convert. So I think part of the disconnect is that if you are leading with, we're trying to recruit you in to make this big commitment right now, that is challenging to do for somebody who's new to file. That's for somebody who doesn't have a relationship with your organization, that is challenging. The other thing that we see a lot of success with is with upsells. So, I've made my, and this is pretty common now. I've made my $25 gift, and as it's processing, you give me a little pop-up that says, thank you so much for supporting us with this $25 one-time gift. You can make an even bigger difference by becoming a $10 a month monthly donor, whatever is the scale that makes sense. So asking people, again, at that moment of commitment, to just commit for the longer term and commit in this different way that allows them to make a difference over time.
I love the nuance. It's great. Questions from the group as we're moving through monthly data?
There's one question here, Philip.
Yep,
Just
go for it, Liz.
wondering if Will knows if there's any difference between the retention rates of monthlies acquired online versus other resources.
I don't.
Yeah, that's a
I don't have any
question.
data on that.
I've got a little data on that. I mean, do you want to go?
No, I was going to say I don't know anything, so go ahead.
Okay, does anyone know the PFFA, the Professional Face-to-Face Association? They've got tons of great data on acquisition channels. So does Blackbaud, by the way, on their Sustainer Summit data. And we all know that face-to-face is a fantastic acquisition channel for new monthly donors. Top of funnel. They don't last long. I mean, that's the challenge, is a lot of them will attrite, certainly by month 12 or 13, but even by month 3. From what I've seen, the very best lifetime value monthly acquired donors come from, drum roll, direct mail. Do you know what I mean? Like, they come from direct mail. It's a very slow, deliberate process. They've decided, they've sent in the check. Second, digital. Third, phone. Fourth, face-to-face. Now, challenge me if you've got other data sets that you've seen. Of course, I'm always looking for the good side of digital. So I always kind of lean into the data. The direct mail piece always surprises me, but every time I meet a big sophisticated direct mail program where they are really driving people to monthly, I'm impressed. But digital is up there. Digitally acquired new monthly donors have a very good lifetime value. Will, I see a lot in my email, particularly from the Americans, not so much from the Canadians, doing these email monthly donor drives where they've got the matching gift, but only if I become a monthly donor. Do you have any thoughts on that? I like your point that if we ask in the meta ad, become a monthly donor to save the whales, the response rate's not so great. But if I get them on that moment of truth, it's way better. So what about this email push? We're going to get into email next, but this push for kind of monthly only drives.
I think if it's working for you, you should keep doing it. It's hard. I think it is not something that I have consistently been able to see success with. We often just see like not a great response rate, and we would have been better off, sending just sending an ad, just saying support this cause, and then either trying to upsell them on the landing page or convert them over time. There's lots of different ways we can move somebody to one-time to monthly. It's something that used to be, I feel like for a few years, we saw a lot of these in January. So you'd have your December really intense one-time giving drive up to that deadline. And then there's this hangover and you kind of like don't say anything for the first couple of weeks of January. But then a lot of organizations would come out with a monthly giving drive in January to say, it feels like it makes sense, right? The year ahead, like make a commitment to make it, it's January, we're making these resolutions, we're committing to things. Now's the time to become a monthly donor. And hard to make work. I think, not that it never works, but it's really hard to sort of see consistent results the way that we do with some other tactics that sort of like, that's a tried and true, like send it out there, you're gonna see, you put an end of your match campaign out there, you're gonna do okay, like those kinds of things. It's been hard. I think that what we are seeing work is in many ways is the opposite of that, these sort of like one-day giving drives. So we're seeing really great results from giving days of saying, we're going to set up a 24-hour campaign or a 48 or 72 if you really want to get extravagant. And we're going to really try to raise as much as we can. We're going to have incentives. We're going to have updates. We're going to coordinate with our social, all of the stuff to really focus attention really intensely. But that tends to be a lot of one-time donors is really where the focus is. I think a lot of those tactics can be repurposed for monthly messaging, but the sort of like, we've got an end of the month drive. We're going to end of our fiscal year, beginning of fiscal year, we're going to try to recruit a bunch of monthly donors. I've really struggled with consistent success on those.
Mm-hmm. Okay, drum roll. Your favorite section, email. Let's talk about email. Anything you want to say before I start showing your stats?
No. Let's get into it.
Let's get into email.
So the lists are growing. 7% last year, 5% the year before, 8% the year before that. Pretty consistent growth. Health organizations remarkably consistent. We also had to double check that. I think that's just a coincidence.
Yeah,
It's
maybe.
very interesting. That's 14% a year. Yeah, no, so lists are growing. Raising money via email is still hard though. And getting harder.
And getting harder. That's my sense, is that it's like the wind keeps increasing. You know, we're leaning into it. I don't know if you've experienced this in Gmail. I'm a big Gmail user. I love Gmail. Gmail protects me from so many things. Like it creates this priority inbox for me based on all sorts of signals that I'm giving it. And then they've made it so easy for me to unsubscribe. I almost think too easy, where they put the big button there, I unsubscribe, and then the next thing that pops up, do you want to mark this as spam? And it's almost defaulted to yes, and I mark it, and I think, oh my gosh, what did I just do? I was taking their email for a long time, I just wasn't clicking. So I do think, to your point, the technology is changing all the time in preference to the donors or the consumer's experience. They're trying to keep my Gmail experience clean and tidy. And it makes it harder.
That's absolutely true. Again, like it's so many of these things are outside of our control. Whatever Google decides to do, whatever Facebook decides to prioritize with their algorithm, really affects how effective these channels can be.
Here's a great graph that you guys put in there. This is email messages per year per subscriber by type: fundraising, advocacy, newsletter, engagement, and other.
Yeah. So the top line is about 60 messages a year, about half of them fundraising. That's typical. And we do see some variations here depending on issue area. Public media is always a standout. They have 55 newsletters a year on average. So I guess like a weekly one and then 3 bonus ones is what they are doing on average, and a much lower percentage of fundraising messages. I think, and then you see wildlife animal welfare having the biggest volume, that last bar, 86 messages per year, but their fundraising volume, not really any different than the overall average. So they're sending, 86 compared to 59 messages, but only 4 more fundraising messages. They're making that up through other engagement, through just cultivation stuff, through just, hey, take a look at these cute animals, I imagine is what it is. And
I think they have better photography than most.
So much of it is that we see this as a standout sector, especially in channels where visuals really matter. So when we see this in sort of display, they often have really great results. Social media engagement for wildlife animal welfare content can be really, really strong because it is, here are these baby animals and they're so adorable, and don't you want to interact with them, at least virtually?
Okay, we're gonna start finishing here. We're kind of cruising into our last 15 minutes, but we're gonna stay with email, and I'm gonna try to kind of start shifting to this. You're really doing a great job in the data showing the time when things happen. So it's not that people email all year round, it's that the email concentration gets heavier and heavier and heavier as we approach between now, July, and the end of the year.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And what we see here, so November and December, a little more than 7 messages each last year. That's going to shift toward December this year, as Giving Tuesday is going to fall in December. At least for American organizations, it's a big deal. It's going to be a really high volume period. And so the end of year fundraising period that is super, super important is going to be compressed for organizations that are relying on Giving Tuesday revenue as well. And it's going to be a really, really intense December, and it's going to be very stressful for all of us. So I hope you're looking forward to that.
Well, yeah, that'll be fun. Hey, and Canadian Giving Tuesday is the same Giving Tuesday. So it's compressed for everybody in North America. I don't know if Australians do Giving Tuesday. Somebody can tell me. But in the crowd that I think is on this call right now, it is going to get compressed. And there's a little thing happening in November called the US election that's going to kind of suck all of the attention from everybody, Canada and US. So how are you thinking about this from an email perspective? How are you Are you adding more emails to your schedule? Are you taking some away? What are you doing?
So I think the trend has been to more email has been the trend, like that, increasing volume has been the trend forever. Shifting the timing has also really so what we tend to see is more intense, slightly longer. So like Giving Tuesday used to be a day. Now Giving Tuesday is like a 4-day, like early birds and then like deadline extension, and that's really common. And on each one of those days, 2 or 3 messages. Like that's like really common, seeing that sort of like wider. December, I feel like used to be a more like, all of December was kind of busy. People would start their match campaign December 1st and run it the whole month. And those first 2 weeks first 3 weeks really like don't do a whole lot for most organizations. So what we're trying to do, what we're seeing a lot more success with, is creating a artificial deadline earlier in December. So doing a giving day on December 10th. That is not the same thing as your end of year campaign, its own thing. That is for whatever, like that's when you can do a flash match, where you can do we're setting a goal for today to try to raise money for whatever reason it is. And then letting that last week of the year, which is really, from December 26th on, that last push, really be really intense. We saw some pullback from December 31st specifically last year. It fell on a Sunday. It fell on a Saturday the year before, and that was hard. It will not be on a weekend again until 2028. So we got a couple of years to figure it out. But more of like, let's start that triple 5 times match on the 28th instead of waiting until the very last second. So just this sort of like, the intensity continues to escalate, but it's changing shape a little bit to fit where people are and to fit the competitive nature of all of us are doing this, right? So it's not, you're not alone when you're sending a match campaign on December 31st. You are in that mix with a lot of people. I think preparing for that, a lot of the messaging you're doing right now is going to affect your results then. So building those stronger relationships, showing the value of your work, so that when we are in this really competitive environment, when there's a lot of noise, your messaging can break through because your audience has trust that whatever you're saying is relevant to them, that whatever you're saying is important and meaningful. That's not something you can turn on in the last week of December. That's the relationship you have to be building all the time. That's why I love email, is you're building that relationship all the time if you're doing it right.
I love it. I love it. I love it. The focus on giving days comes back in your comments here. The fact that you're really trying to create that intensity, you're trying to create that compression of messaging. I put a couple of pictures of my inbox just for fun. This was last December. This is a group, National Wildlife Federation. And, this was from, let's see, November 30th at the bottom to December 31st. So this was what I received from them. And then I did another picture of, this was Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation from December 12th to December 31st. So, I think it is a little bit of a race to how many messages, but I liked what you were saying, which is maybe it's not just spreading messages across December, it's focusing that on a giving day. You said something also in your kind of throwaway comment, you said 5 times match. I'm assuming 2 times match is just not going to do it anymore, correct?
I wish I had better data about this, because this is one of the places where it's hard to think like a normal person anymore, having done this, because like, to me, I'm like, well, a 2 times match, a 5 times match, like, okay, but like those feel like equivalent to me. But a lot of organizations do see better results, I think, and there's a sense of like, well, how much of a match, like, are you going to have to do 8 times? Like, where does this arms race end? Are we going to start saying, and some of it feels silly. And I think more important than the number you put against the 2x, it's talking about what that impact is. And the reason that people give in response to a match is because they want their donation to make an impact. That's what a matching gift is. It is saying, we're going to enhance the impact of your gift. Focus on the impact of the gift. And whether it's a 2 times or 3 times, it's doing more of it, but the impact of the gift is the thing that people care about. That's what's motivating them. And so that's what we see with the match campaign. The other thing about the giving days is they're creating urgency. So what we want is, there's a natural urgency at the December 31st deadline. What we want to do is create a reason to give on the 28th that is different than the 27th, like an urgency in that moment that is not all being driven by the end of month, because that is out of our hands. That roller coaster is going where it's going, and everybody's along for that same ride. If we have ways that we can create our own sense of urgency at a different part of the month, that's where we really see success.
And we are walking uphill, and the wind is getting harder. To your point, I mean, this was your change in response, fundraising response rate in email, 22-23, down 16%. So it's harder to get the click than it was last year.
Yep. And so it's all of the metrics as well that we can track. So click-through rates were down, page completion rates were down. Those two together mean that your response rate is down. So it's both getting people to click on the email, but also really crucially getting them to complete the gift when they've landed on the landing page has become more difficult. We see those rates go down. This is, again, a long-term trend. This is like, we're always like, well, it's down a little bit. How down a little bit more? Got to keep working hard. And so I do think that this is not only an email. This is also taking a look at your landing pages, making sure that those are optimized and those are as effective as they can be. But yeah, it's hard out there.
It's hard. It's hard. And then this will be my last email slide. Then we'll finish up, I think, with paid ads. So let's just talk about this email revenue per 1,000. I like that kind of metric. Do you find that's the main metric people are looking at, is revenue per 1,000?
I think this is a really great look at one, how hard it is to do this work, because you land in 1,000 inboxes, you get $76. That feels like, oh man, this is hard. I think that this is a great measure of health. I don't think that it's what people mostly look at. I think because this is the aggregate of everything else that is happening. I think that it's typically much more helpful to look at specific metrics. Look at your click-through rate. If that's in good shape, well, then you're doing well. If you're seeing that your click-through rates are declining, what's going on? Maybe it's time to redesign your templates. Maybe it's time to think about your audiences. Are they getting stale? Do you have new list members? All of those things. I think these aggregate numbers tell us the health of the program, but they don't help us diagnose particular problems.
Yep. Okay. Any final thoughts on email, since it's your favorite topic?
No, if we had another hour,
digital ads.
Now let's talk about something.
Exactly. All right. Is that enough? Paid ads. Let's end up with paid ads, and then I'm going to finish with, okay, for the rest of the year, thoughts, comments, and then I would love for the audience to ask some questions. We got about 9 minutes left. Paid ads. You had some great kind of overall stats going into this ad scorecard. Do you want to just highlight a couple that mean something to you?
Sure. So I think, some of the things that are true now and have always been true. Search is where you should start. Max out your search budget before you do anything else. You're going to see a much higher return on ad spend for search than for any other digital channel. I think most groups are there. Once you're there, where your opportunities lie are going to depend on who you are and how you want to approach it. So, and the balance between lead generation and fundraising and sort of brand awareness is going to depend. Larger groups tend to spend more on brand awareness than smaller groups. We see that on average, digital ad budgets continue to grow. Groups are spending about 12 cents for every dollar they raise online. That's not a measure of ROI. That's a measure of sort of like scale. If you're a group that raises $1 million online, you will be reinvesting about $120,000 in digital ads on average. So that's sort of like the ratio, but that's not necessarily driving all that revenue.
I love that ratio, because I do find for many of our clients, they're not spending 12 cents of every dollar raised online. So when they see that, it's challenging.
It's a good way to get a sense of where your peers are, for sure.
To show you where the peers are. And again, I think your data set shows a very sophisticated digital American average, generally speaking, I would say. And it's a great benchmark for many Canadians and others to look at to say, look, they're investing 12 cents. I'm sure some invest more than that, obviously, if that's the median number.
One of the few contexts in which you should try to be as aggressive as Americans are, I would say.
Well, in digital ads, for sure. Exactly. No problem. The other one I wanted to point out was your ROAS. So we're talking a lot more about return on ad spend with our clients, which is this one was at the highest search advertising, to your point, had the highest return on ad spend ROAS at $2.70. Generally speaking, I'm finding that search spend, so we're paying Google to prioritize in that search. Those searches are brand terms. So if we're paying for Jane Goodall, it's searching for Jane Goodall. So people who are actually in that search are looking for that brand, and they're clicking on that paid ad rather than organic. I do find lately we've been spending a lot more money on Performance Max, which has a bit of paid search in there, but it's an AI ads platform from Google that kind of says, trust us, give us your content, give us your short videos, give us your lead lines, all these kind of things, give us your budget, give us your target, and let the machine figure out what audience it should bring into it. So I just wanted to kind of drop that into this digital ads discussion, that if you haven't yet started playing around with PMax, I think now would be a good time to start playing with it. And then you showed this great graph of spend by month.
Yeah, so unsurprisingly, December is where we see the biggest spike in spending, and that's when the resources are really opened up. You see, especially for display, because that is driven by nonprofit strategy. Search is only partially driven by our strategy, and like the great thing, like search has the highest ROAS, but there's a ceiling on it because there are only so many people who are searching for Jane Goodall, right? And so, but with display, that's where we can be sort of, whether you want to see us or not, we're going to be in your face. And so you do see that spike as well tend to happen there. This is a fun roller coaster ride, and I think it helps you see sort of what folks are focusing on. It's end of year. You see a spike in June. I'd attribute that probably to like end of fiscal year. A lot of organizations do it like a membership drive or an end of fiscal year sort of fundraising drive. I think that's what you're seeing, that sort of localized spike in June.
And the February spike is interesting, just in terms of that. It's kind of, I guess, the New Year's resolutions campaigns.
It's weird. So much of it is social. When you see like the actual thing that's happening there, social is really big for some reason in January and in February. It feels like it is just carrying over from December. I don't actually know what that's about. That looks weird to me.
It is interesting. It is interesting. I do find that, to your point, January becomes an opportunity for many clients because we've worked so hard. We're kind of at max going through December, and then everybody takes a break. Little, like you said, a hangover. But there's a lot of fundraising that could be done in January if we've got the ads ready to go.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to round it out here. We've got 5 minutes left. I hope the audience has a question or two. How do we prepare for the rest of the year? I mean, I think that's the question on everybody's mind. And you showed this data that was very good about, hey, here's how much of your overall online fundraising comes on the day of December 31st, on the week of December 31st, and for that month of December. Such concentration. And to your point, it's going to be even more concentrated in 2024.
And this also, I think, undercounts it. So this is all giving online. So this includes monthly giving, which is not going to vary very much from November to December. So if you pull that out, you look just at one time, the percentage is even higher because that's really what's happening. That we see the spike in one-time giving that is happening in December. So yes, it's a busy time. It's a really important time, and it's going to be a lot of eggs in that basket. How to prepare? Again, I think that getting your monthly donors now is great because they will be there for you in December. Absolutely something you should be happening year round. Starting to show really what you are doing differently from other organizations, what value you are bringing, what you're changing in the world is going to be very important. Thinking about your ad spending now. So part of that is going to be Facebook is going to do, and this is going to affect more US organizations, a lot of restrictions on ads content that is political in nature as we get toward the election. So that's, I don't have time to explain it now, but like that's something you should be looking at if you're not already. And then really starting to think about how you are going to vary your narrative and create moments of urgency from post-election, if that's relevant to you, to Giving Tuesday, to that dead zone of December in between Giving Tuesday and real intense end of year. And then again, so like think about pockets of urgency that you can create, something that is timely, something that feels different than what you're going to be saying. Because if you just go full on, matching gift, like yelling from the rooftops from December 31st to the 31st, you're going to exhaust yourselves and your audience.
Yep. All right. Let's just end it here, I think, because I know you got to run at 1. Rather than turn it into a big Q&A session, I just want to express gratitude that you spent time with us today, that you gave us this kind of unvarnished advice, and that the comments were so insightful. So thank you, Will.
Thank you so much. This is really fun. I don't know if you can tell, but I love talking about benchmarks. And,
I know.
and
this is good. We should do it again. We can spend the whole hour on email.
I love it. I would encourage people to donate, to look at this. We just scratched the surface of the data here. If you have not read and memorized the full benchmark study, it's available at mrbenchmarks.com. And if you want this data for yourself and you don't have it, a great way to get your data in shape is to participate in benchmarks. We provide templates, we give you instructions, and then you will help enhance the data set that we have and really help to, you'll get your own comparison so you can see how you stack up against the benchmark. So you can sign up for that also, again, mrbenchmarks.com.
Thank you, Will. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of the day. And thanks everybody for joining the webinar today. We'll hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right.